I'm going to tell you a biblical story about Jacob and Esau. They were sons of Isaac and Rebekah, and they were the first twins ever mentioned in the Bible. They were twins. And even before they were born, Rebekah talks about the fact that they were fighting in the womb. Esau managed to be the firstborn, and right on his heels was Jacob. Now the twins were very, very different, as you may recall the story. Jacob was a quiet man, and he stayed among the tents, meaning he stayed home, took care of the home, was very domestic, and he was, therefore, his mother's favorite. Now Esau was a skillful hunter, and he was out there in the hills and the valleys and doing his thing, and he obviously became the father's favorite. Well, one day Esau returned from hunting, and he desired some lentil soup, and Jacob was cooking. Well, Jacob offered to give his brother this soup, this stew, in exchange for his birthright, meaning Jacob wanted to be the firstborn, or the birthright of the firstborn. And what did that mean? That means that he would get twice as much as what the other would get in terms of the inheritance, in terms of land, in terms of prestige, and so on. So Esau put his temporary physical needs over his God-given blessing, and he sold his birthright to Jacob for a pot of stew. Now, when the time came for Isaac, the father, to bestow the blessing on Esau as the oldest, Jacob and his mother created a deception. And they deceived Isaac into blessing Jacob instead of Esau. So Jacob was now the heir of all of the property and the throne. He had successfully maneuvered his way into being the number one son. But when Esau found out that the blessing had been given to Jacob, he was very upset and he threatened to kill his brother. So Jacob fled. And years later, as it turns out, Jacob and Esau were, in fact, reconciled. Both Esau and Jacob became fathers of nations. Now you may know about Jacob that his name was eventually changed to Israel. And he was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now Esau's descendants were not so great. They were the Edomites. Edom was a nation that actually plagued Israel many years hence. Now, what happened, of course, in this story is that this is not necessarily historical. When we look at things, we look at things metaphysically. Okay, what does this mean? The fact of the matter is, within each of us, there's an Esau and a Jacob. Okay? Charles Fillmore says we have to look at the story in light of some spiritual understanding. It's actually a very subtle but powerful description of our soul's evolution. Our soul's evolution. In fact, it's all about the story of growing forth in consciousness. The soul is progressive. Esau represents that nature of man, our natural tendencies, our instincts, our humanity, if you will. And this natural man is not necessarily wise, however. Sometimes our instincts are not particularly wise. They come from that reactive mode, that place of where we have those animal instincts, and they run at a fairly low level. And it's sometimes necessary in order for us to move forth into a greater spirituality, to suppress those instincts, to keep them low so that we may move up into a higher level of consciousness, which is all about the process that Rebekah and Jacob did to deceive Esau, keeping him at a lower level and not moving him up into a place of power and position. Because then if you keep those instincts under control and under our awareness and therefore under our choices, then we can move up into a greater state of consciousness, which was represented by Jacob. Now, Jacob had a dream. Okay. The interesting thing about these stories in the Bible is that they all represent our progression in consciousness, moving into higher states of consciousness. The story of Esau and Jacob is just about that. We all have an Esau within us, and we all have a Jacob in us that moves us to a higher light, moves us to a higher sense of being. Actually, the whole Bible, the entire Bible, is about each person's journey from a lower consciousness to a higher consciousness. And in fact, it is also the journey of humanity from the lower consciousness to the higher consciousness. And when we study that Bible in that way, we realize that the Bible and every story within it is about us. Well, Jacob had a dream, and that dream is something that perhaps we can all relate to as well. We had a dream of a ladder, and there were angels ascending and descending the ladder. And they started on the lower levels, which was the human aspect of it, and they transcended up into the higher heavens, into the gate of heaven, way above, into those enlightened states of being. And then bringing that enlightenment, they would come down and bring that enlightenment back into the earth, into the plane, and moving up and down this ladder. Eventually, we will all achieve that divine consciousness and bring those truths back to the world. That is, in essence, what we are all called to do. It's all about consciousness. In New Thought, in Unity, and all of the New Thought teachings, what we talk about is consciousness. How we begin to evolve our consciousness. We are more than a philosophy in life. We are a path of spirituality that is calling us to rise above and continue to rise on that ladder of consciousness, moving us forward into greater states of understanding the truth of who we really are. Now, whether or not we respond to these stories, whether or not we respond to the call to rise above, whether or not we respond to any of those things is up to us. Because the one given thing that we have as human beings is choice. We may choose to respond or not. Now, there's many ways of looking at the rungs on Jacob's ladder. And there's many ways that people have talked about it. Peggy, I was trying to think of the author, Power versus Force, David Hawkins. He has a way of looking at it, which he described today in her meditation. Today I want to tell you about the way that Michael Beckwith does it. Michael Beckwith is from Agape. He's one of the New Thought leaders of our time. Right? And he has 4 levels that he talks about with consciousness, and I want to share these with you. The first is, he says, we operate at a level that's a lower level where we feel that the world is happening to us. Okay? That things are happening to me. And in that instance, we have no control over everything. It's like this is happening and that's happening. And we are governed by all the external forces in our world. And there's an appearance that we have absolutely no control. And you often will say when you are in this to-me mode of consciousness, why does this happen to me? Or why does this keep happening to me? Okay? And it's in this time when we actually might look at the patterns in our life and seeing them going over and over and over again, saying, keeps happening to me. Why is this happening to me? And we actually are in what we refer to as victim consciousness. I'd be willing to bet the majority of our world right now is in victim consciousness. The question is, are you? When we are in victim consciousness, it's everything out there is to blame. Everything out there is the cause of what is happening to me. And we are the victim. And oftentimes we live our lives in that victim consciousness. Now, as we move forward in consciousness, we begin to realize, as we preach in New Thought, there is a power in this universe, and I can use it. There's a power in this universe, and I can use it. In fact, I can be a co-creator with God. I am one with God. I can do some interesting things. I can change my life, and we move into The next level of consciousness, according to Michael Beckwith, which is where we, rather than saying it's happening to me, we change it to it. Now I am making it happen in the world. Now I have some control over what's going on. Now I am able to create my reality. Don't we always talk about that in New Thought? Yes, we can create our own reality by what? By our thoughts. So we start to change our thinking. We do our affirmations. We do our meditations. We do visualizations, and we do vision boards, and we use the effective power of affirmative prayer. And we start to have some influence on our reality, and we see things begin to change. This is where we say, I can control my thoughts and I can control my life. Change my thoughts and I will change my life. And there's opportunities for us then to experience a whole new world based on this next level of consciousness where we are the co-creators with God and we have some impact on what is happening. In fact, in my E-Squared class, that's what we've been talking about. Through the power of setting intentions, through the power of getting clear with our thoughts, the power of really working with our consciousness, we begin to change the world around us. And we change our world, our reality. Now there's an opportunity in this state of consciousness to eventually give up and let go of the power that comes with that. Where we sometimes say, I'm powerful, I can make things happen. And we can. But the next level of consciousness that Michael Beckwith talks about is where we start to realize that now God is not something that we are co-creators with, but rather God is working through me. So it's not so much that I am doing this to the world with my intentions, with my thoughts and so on, but rather I'm letting go of that and letting God move through me. And we become a vessel. We become a vessel of letting God move through us. And this is where we would say, not my will, but thy will be done. And that's a very different place to be when we let go and we say, and let God. When we truly surrender to the will of God and say, not my will, but thy will. And this is where then we might be doing visioning. And in visioning, we say, what is God's vision for me? In visualization, we say, this is what I want. Okay? You know, and each level of consciousness is appropriate and right. But when we move into through me, we let God move through us, and we have a mindset of openness. It is not I. And we come to realize that it's not I that does, but the Father. So we come to realize it's not me that does the changing and the manipulation and the incredible wonders of the world, but rather it is God flowing through me. And the difference is that we start to release and let go and let God do that work. Then the fourth level of consciousness that Michael Beckwith refers to is as me. God is moving as me. And in this state, you believe and you know that I and God are one. And that level of consciousness is the experience of the divine or the mystic mind, an experience of being one with Spirit. And you know that you are one with all that is. Now, every level of these consciousnesses are ones that we move back and forth from. That's why the angels in the ladder of consciousness are moving up and moving down. Because there are times when each one of us are acting like victims. Are we not? Oh, why is this happening to me? Or what's going on? And we act like victims and we can get into victim consciousness. Now, hopefully, we have our friends among us who say, you're acting like a victim. Okay? You can move up. We need to rise up into the next level of consciousness, which is, as we move up in the next level of consciousness, is how can I take control over my life? How can I begin to change it with my thoughts? with my affirmative prayer, with my meditations, with my affirmations. By all means, we can step into that, and we can be powerful in terms of what we begin to create in our lives. And yet there's also times when all of us have acknowledged, wow, well, we actually will say miracles have happened because we feel we are in the presence of something greater than us that is really making those changes, that is really moving us into a higher plane, into a higher place. And then there are those times when we might actually experience oneness, the true essence of oneness, when we know we are one with God. And that's when we might have that mystical moment. Now, it might not last long, because then the next moment you might be back into victimhood. However, we all go up and down that ladder. And the more we know about that ladder, and the more we understand our consciousness, the more we can become aware of where we are and what we are doing. And clearly, the one place we don't want to be is in the victim consciousness. And so when we find one another in that place, can we assist ourselves and assist people and help them? When we grow and expand and we are open to those higher levels of consciousness, that is where all things become so much easier in our world. And often through the difficulties that we do have in life, the problems, the crises, the discord, the difficulties, all those things that make us feel like victims, these are also the things that can sometimes help propel us to a higher state of consciousness, where opportunities abound for us to rise up. When we get to ground zero in terms of being a victim, there is only one way up, is there not? Moving up. And so sometimes we have to get there before we can let go of that victim consciousness. A great New Thought writer, Hazrat Khan, says this: the solution to the problem of the day is the awakening of the consciousness of humanity to the divinity within. So oftentimes when we are faced with serious problems and crises, where do we turn? Have a crisis, and where do you turn? Oftentimes to prayer, oftentimes to God, or sometimes to your chaplain, or sometimes to your minister, or whomever that can help move you into that higher state of consciousness. And you've heard this 1,000 times, but really hear it today. Einstein says we can never solve a problem at the same level of consciousness at which it was created. If you have a problem, whatever it may be, you are called to rise to a higher level in order to dissolve that problem. Not necessarily easy to do. Now, Wayne Dyer says there's a spiritual solution to every problem. So many of our New Thought writers talk about this, that the problems and the difficulties are our opportunities to move into those higher levels of consciousness. So let's talk about problems for a moment. First of all, you have to become aware that there is a problem. How often in New Thought do we want to, oh no, let's just affirm it over. Everything is good. Everything is fine. Okay? And yet we don't necessarily acknowledge that there is a problem. You can't change what you aren't aware of. You can't change what you have not acknowledged. So sometimes you have to acknowledge the fact that there is a problem in order for you to step into understanding at what level of consciousness was this created so that we can move up to the next level of consciousness to resolve it. So becoming aware of it is very important. And sometimes the repeating patterns in our lives are a signal. You have a problem. Now, until you actually become aware of that, do you think you have a problem? No. A lot of times we think things are fine until we realize there's something going on. If you leave a job where you have a difficult boss, say, okay, I'm going to the next job, and then you find that same difficult boss there.